The Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Ultra-Orthodox as far as the eye can see, but who's going to tweet it? Desserts for the holiday, talking about Jewish leadership, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. It was one of the largest Jewish gatherings in modern times, but its message was anything but modern. Avoid the internet, declared ultra-Orthodox rabbis to as many as 60,000 ultra-Orthodox Jews gathered in major stadiums in Queens, New York. The so-called Internet Asifa sold out the home of Major League Baseball's New York Mets and hosted an overflow crowd at Arthur Ashe Stadium. Untold numbers of others tuned in through, yes, streaming video over the internet. For the ultra-Orthodox audience, the message from rabbinic speakers included those that the internet should not be used in any home, that children with internet access in their homes should not be allowed to attend yeshivas, and that the internet represents the greatest threat to Jewish souls since Zionism. A protest outside the event drew some hundreds of people to talk about the major ultra-Orthodox issue that's made headlines in recent months, that of abuse and criminal activity in the ultra-Orthodox community that goes unreported due to intimidation. In keeping with ultra-Orthodox standards, everyone in the stadium audience was male. Or almost everyone. The New York Observer's Adiyar Jeffries pulled a Yentl, dressing up in her brother's clothing and passing as a man to get inside. She sat down with our Meredith Gansman to talk about her experience.
Who came up with the idea to send you, a female, into the city field where it was only the ultra-Orthodox men?
When we first heard about the rally, we were like, oh, we should go, this is big news. And then a little bit later, the news came out that it was going to be men only. And I had the idea immediately because I was curious to hear what they'd say and I wanted to go. But I wasn't totally serious about it. So I think I said something on Twitter like, I'm going in drag.
It really, to me, seems very, very scary.
I thought that if I got discovered that it would be unpleasant. I don't think I would have been like violently attacked or anything. Like I said in the story, once I was in the disguise and someone asked me for directions at the rally, I knew it was going to be okay.
So talk to me about getting into that disguise, what it was for you.
I went to Payless and bought a pair of like kids' shoes, like loafers, borrowed some dress slacks and a tie and a white shirt.
What was the overall feeling once in Citi Field?
And on the way it was very like, it was kind of like kids going on a field trip. Like people seemed like very excited to be out in this big group and going to a big thing, and the crowd was it seemed to me like not very focused the whole time. Like the event opened with evening prayer and some people were praying and others were clearly not praying. They were.
And your opinion on what was being discussed?
It was a total revelation to me to see that some people feel this way about the internet, which I totally understand if you want to live in an isolated community and preserve a certain way of life. At the rally, they never explicitly said what was wrong with the internet, but they were pretty clearly talking about porn. And I just thought, like, I bet they have no idea exactly how bad it gets.
What has been the reaction to people finding out that you went and hearing about your experiences?
I think most of the reaction has been supportive, probably because it's all come in through the internet. I don't know what people are saying offline. There were some people who said, that it was unnecessary, that it was disrespectful, which I can understand where they're coming from.
All right, Adrienne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Meredith. Another place many women haven't felt welcome due to ultra-Orthodox influence is the Western Wall in Jerusalem. And this week, 3 women were detained by police for wearing traditional prayer shawls during prayer services. The 3 were part of a 40-strong prayer group assembled by the organization Women of the Wall. A 2001 Israeli law bars women from wearing prayer shawls or tefillin or reading from a Torah scroll at the Western Wall. Some might look at various of these reports and assert that there's a need for new leadership in the Jewish community. Our Christian Needham reports on a panel about the challenges facing Jewish leaders today.
Young Jewish professionals got some very direct job advice this week at Park East Synagogue in Manhattan, where a panel of veteran and successful Jewish professionals dispensed advice on getting to the top of the music, fashion, and political consulting industries. They included musician and producer Ital Shore, whose songwriting career includes the Grammy-winning song Smooth, on a Santana album that sold over 25 million copies. but he emphasized that success in his industry was no sure thing.
You have to be crazy to make it in the music business. I'm sorry, but you really have to be crazy. Crazy into what you're doing. And like, if you're not, then don't do it, because nothing's going to get handed to you. I hate to sound like this, but that's the way it's become. And that's this reality.
Eliza Licht, who works in global communications at Donna Karan International, echoed that sentiment, noting that the right attitude is the best way to advance within the fashion industry and is all too rare among the up-and-comers that she oversees.
This sense of entitlement that people have, that I see our interns have, that they think because they're there, they get a reference. And that's not the case. You have to make an impression, and I think that just because you do your job doesn't mean that you get a promotion. So I think you have to go above and beyond in whatever you do.
Hank Scheinkopf has spent decades establishing an above-and-beyond reputation in the public relations and political consulting industries, and recounted a particularly eventful day in his professional life, a day he said young professionals should be ready to handle if they want to replace him at the top of his field.
I had a police shooting in White Plains. We represented the cops. I had 2 reputational issues that were serious people, business types falling apart. I had 3 other crises all going on at the same time, and then the Hasidim walked in about the Zalmans and the Aronis, and forget about it. I mean, it was just a day. That was one day.
That advice came as part of the first in an ongoing series of panels set up by the Park East Young Professionals Group, whose board member Candace Crystal moderated this panel. She said she appreciated the honest answers she received from the panelists.
They are blunt, and that's what they bring to the table. And I think it's refreshing for us to hear that, because a lot of times you don't actually hear the truth when you try to go into an industry. So it's refreshing.
To see more from the Park East Young Professionals Group panel discussion, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. A problem facing many in America these days is eating disorders, and Rebecca Honig-Friedman reports on how they affect the Jewish community.
An estimated 10 to 15% of Americans will suffer from an eating disorder over the course of their lifetimes, and there's evidence to suggest that a disproportionate number of those with eating disorders are Jewish. Hillary Waller is one of those Jewish women. A recovering anorexic, Waller comes from an observant, conservative Jewish family and has struggled with eating issues for most of her life.
I track it back to the age of about 7 or 8 years old. I kept diaries when I was that young, talking about my weight and my feelings about my body and ideas about how I should eat.
After struggling with anorexia through most of high school and college, Waller finally got help from the Renfrew Center, a prominent eating disorder treatment center with locations around the country. But maintaining her Jewish observance while recovering from her eating disorder proved a challenge.
When I was at Renfrew, there wasn't an option to keep kosher in a way that was exactly the same as the rest of the girls in the group, and I opted not to keep kosher. As a result, I don't know how to keep kosher and be in recovery at the same time.
Since then, with a spike in the number of Jewish women seeking treatment, Renfrew has implemented a special track for observant Jewish women, providing kosher food and other accommodations for religious patients, including input from rabbis. Sarah Bateman runs the Orthodox track at Renfrew's New York Treatment Center.
It's just about being aware of the cultural trends, the religious needs, respecting the religious needs, and trying to work with their faith, not against it.
As part of that effort, Renfrew sponsored a conference this past week to highlight the specific risk factors and needs of Jewish women and girls who struggle with eating issues.
The primary risk factor for developing an eating problem is, does anyone know?
Your mother having an eating disorder?
Being female. 90% of those with eating problems are female.
And evidence suggests that Jewish females may be even more at risk. A 2008 study of female high school students in Toronto found that 25% of Jewish girls had an eating disorder, compared to 18% of non-Jewish girls. And a 1996 study of an Orthodox girls' high school in Brooklyn found that 1 in 9 teen girls had an eating disorder, which is about 50% higher than the general population. Consider also that Israel has among the world's highest rates of eating disorders, and here in the United States, though only about 2% of Americans are Jewish, about 12% of those with eating disorders identify as Jewish. according to eating disorder and body image specialist Adrienne Ressler.
It is higher than one would expect in the population based on, the number of Jews, the percentage of Jews in the population.
Ressler and Professor Marjorie Feinson, a researcher who focuses on eating disorders in the Jewish community, presented insights into the ways that Judaism and eating problems can play into each other.
One thing can be a pressure to excel. Jews want to be the best and the brightest, and we often are, and sometimes, like anything, that can be taken to extremes. And there's too much pressure to be a good girl or the best wife.
But one of the biggest considerations?
The dominance and prominence of food in Judaism.
For more on the problem of eating disorders in the Jewish community, watch the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. Finally, this week is the holiday of Shavuot, with a tradition to eat dairy meals. Meredith Gansman stopped in with perhaps the most famous cheesecake maker to get new tips for holiday desserts.
For me, you don't need a special reason to eat cheesecake. This rich and creamy dessert is one of my favorites. But on the holiday of Shavuot, eating dairy foods like cheesecake is a religious experience. Shavuot celebrates the anniversary of the biblical story of the giving of the Ten Commandments to Moses and the Israelites at Mount Sinai. But where is the commandment to eat cheesecake? Well, that's just it. Before the Israelites received the Torah, there were no kosher dietary laws. And so tradition has said the first meal the Jews ate after receiving the Torah was a dairy meal. Combined with the Bible's mention of Israel as a land of milk and honey, we eat cheesecake. And where better to go for cheesecake than the one and only Junior's restaurant in Brooklyn, New York.
When people say Junior's, they think cheesecake, and when people say cheesecake, they think about Junior's.
But before I could taste, Junior's third-generation owner, Alan Rosen, and I had to bake.
Cream cheese, fresh eggs, sugar, heavy cream, a touch of vanilla. It's creamy, it's smooth, it's rich, it's sweet, it's balanced. It's just a singular great cheesecake.
And this recipe hasn't changed since the restaurant opened in 1950. From the mixer, the batter is taken to new heights and pumped into each cake pan. Then into the oven, which bakes 180 cakes at once. The cakes bake at approximately 350 degrees for 1 hour or until they're golden brown. And here's a tip for the home baker. A baking sheet filled with water under the cake pan can help with even baking and prevent cracks. Junior's makes over 2,000 cakes every day, each delicious. From Junior's classic cheesecake, wait till you see this delicious update on the dessert.
Okay, this is our cheesecake, and then cheesecake is in the cheesecloth.
To find out about the Fromage Blanc Island cheesecake, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
That's delicious. That is so good.
Thank you, Meredith. That's all for this week from all of us here at the Jewish Channel. Be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 291, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and now on Comcast Cable in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.